He told girls I was dangerous. He warned them to stay away. He built a quiet little reputation for me, one whispered conversation at a time, and I never said a single word back, not one. Instead, I bought his ex-girlfriend a Coke at a party, introduced her to some people, and had a nice chat about where we grew up. That was it. That was the whole plan. And somehow, it worked better than anything I could have engineered. Most revenge stories involve schemes, traps, and satisfying moments of public humiliation. This one is a little different. This is about the quietest, most patient revenge I've ever heard, one where the weapon was just being genuinely decent, and the payoff came from someone who had every reason to believe the worst about me deciding, on her own, that she'd been lied to. Hit that like button, subscribe if you're new, and let me tell you how kindness became the most effective thing in my arsenal. University is a strange social landscape. You arrive as a mostly formed person and immediately get dropped into a dozen overlapping circles. Classmates, dorm neighbors, people you meet at parties, friends of people you barely know. Social reputations form fast, often with very little input from the person they're about. One comment in the right conversation, one secondhand account passed along at the wrong moment, and suddenly you're carrying a label you never chose and can't quite locate the origin of. I grew up in a secular household, drinking, staying out late, the general texture of normal young adult life. None of this was a big deal in my family. Not reckless, not hidden, just ordinary. I wasn't ashamed of it, and I didn't pretend otherwise. The new group of friends I'd fallen into at university were mostly Christian. And I want to be clear here. Most of them were completely relaxed about the way I lived. They had their own versions of the same young adult life, just a little quieter about it, and there was genuine warmth and easy friendship in that group. I liked them. I fit in fine. Except for one guy, I'll be generous and say that he genuinely believed what he was doing was right. He was the kind of person who had decided that his personal values were not just his personal values, they were a standard, and anyone who didn't meet it was a risk to be managed. He didn't drink, he didn't engage in the normal messiness of young adult social life, and he was loudly, visibly proud of that fact. In a group setting, he was preachy in the way that some people are. Not hostile exactly, just relentlessly certain, and slightly exhausting to be around for any extended period. Fine. People like this exist. You learn to navigate them. What I could not navigate as easily was what I started hearing from other people. Not confrontations. He wasn't brave enough for that. Whispers, warnings. He had been going around to girls in our social circle, telling them things about me that weren't true, painting me as someone dangerous, someone to avoid. The specific claims varied depending on who was telling me, but the consistent thread was this. He was systematically trying to damage my reputation, one private conversation at a time, and doing it from behind a shield of concern and moral authority so that anyone who questioned him looked like the unreasonable one. I was annoyed. More than annoyed, honestly. There's something particularly maddening about being lied about by someone who gets to frame the lie as protection. But I didn't know what to do about it yet. A few weeks later, at a university party, I spotted a girl standing near the edge of the room, looking like she deeply regretted being there. Uncomfortable body language, cup she wasn't drinking from, eyes doing the constant low-grade scan of someone who's waiting for a reason to leave. I didn't know her well, but I recognized her. She was his ex-girlfriend. He was, by all accounts, still very much in love with her, which made her presence at this particular party interesting. I was in a good mood. When I've had a few drinks, I tend to get friendly in the most uncomplicated way. Not loud, just warm, the kind of energy that wants everyone in the room to be having a better time than they currently are. I went over, introduced myself, asked if she wanted a Coke since she clearly wasn't drinking, and pulled her into a conversation with a few people I knew. We ended up talking for a while about our hometowns. Turned out we'd grown up not far from each other. Easy conversation, easy company. Then I moved on and didn't think much more of it. The following week I ran into her between classes. She stopped me, and what she said hit differently than I expected. She told me she'd been uncomfortable at the party because she had heard things about me. Significant things, alarming things, and had walked in half convinced that I was going to be aggressive or inappropriate toward her. She had been braced for it, and then I'd brought her a soft drink and introduced her to some people and talked about growing up in the same part of the country. I stood there and let that land. He had gotten to her too. Of course he had. She was his ex, probably someone he still talked to, and warning her about me had probably felt like the most natural thing in the world to him. He'd handed her a version of me that made her walk into a party on guard, shoulders up, expecting the worst. And now she was standing in front of me, a little embarrassed, telling me she'd been wrong. I could have said a lot of things in that moment. I could have told her everything I knew about what he'd been saying, laid out the full picture, made sure she understood exactly who had put those ideas in her head and why. Part of me wanted to. Instead, I had a better idea. From that moment on, I made a simple decision. I was going to be exactly who I actually was, as visibly and consistently as possible, and I was never going to say a single negative word about him in the process. Not one. It sounds almost too simple to call it a plan, but the logic was clean. He had built a version of me in her mind using words. Whispered, private, unverifiable words. The only thing that could dismantle that version wasn't more words. It was evidence. Consistent, repeated, undeniable evidence that the person she'd been warned about didn't exist. So I invited her round for tea. I left genuine comments on things she posted. When we were in group settings, I was on my best behavior. Not performed, not calculated, just actually present and kind in the way I tried to be anyway. We built a real friendship, the kind that develops naturally when two people genuinely enjoy each other's company. And every time his name came up, I said nothing negative. Not because I had nothing to say, I had plenty, but because I understood something. The moment I started talking badly about him, I became exactly what he'd said I was. Someone with an agenda. Someone not to be trusted. The high road wasn't just ethically correct, it was tactically perfect. A few months later, word found its way back to me through the social grapevine. He had approached her at a party, probably hoping to reopen the door, probably still carrying the torch he'd never quite put down. And he had made the mistake of bringing me up. He told her I was a secular monster trying to corrupt her. He was freaking out that we'd become friends. He wanted her to understand the danger. She told him off, not gently. She told him what a genuinely good person I was, how I had never once said a bad word about him, and suggested that he spend less time worrying about me and more time thinking about how he treated the people around him. They never got back together. And from what I heard afterward, she found him increasingly annoying the pettiness of it, the small-minded obsession with controlling how others saw me. The irony of a person who presented himself as morally superior, running a quiet smear campaign against someone he'd decided was beneath him. The truth had done what I couldn't have done myself. I hadn't argued, I hadn't defended, I hadn't campaigned. I had just shown up repeatedly as myself, and eventually that was enough. Here's the thing about reputation attacks. They work best in the dark. They work best when the person being talked about is abstract, a collection of warnings and implications, rather than an actual human being someone has spent real time with. The moment the target becomes real, becomes present, becomes the person who hands you a Coke when you're uncomfortable at a party and talks to you about where you grew up, the abstract version starts to fall apart. He had built a version of me out of things that weren't true, and he'd protected that version by keeping her away from me. The second that stopped working, the second she actually met me and kept meeting me, his whole construction came undone. Not because I attacked it, because reality showed up, and the detail that I think made her genuinely angry, the detail that turned her from confused to outright dismissive of him, was that I had never said a word against him. Because that's not what a dangerous person does. That's not what someone with bad intentions does. Someone with bad intentions fights back. Someone who's actually decent just keeps being decent and lets it speak. I still think fondly of that friendship, not because of the revenge, though I'd be lying if I said I didn't enjoy hearing how that conversation at the party went. But because what started as a petty plan turned into something genuinely good. A real friendship with someone who had every reason to write me off and chose not to, once she had the actual evidence. He tried to use her against me. She ended up being the person who delivered the verdict. Karma doesn't always arrive in dramatic fashion. Sometimes it just shows up as a friend you weren't expecting to make. If this story hit differently than your average revenge tale, smash that like button and drop a comment. Have you ever let your actions speak louder than your words? And had it actually work? I want to hear every story. And if you want more tales of karma, patience, and the occasional perfectly timed Coke at a party, subscribe. New story every week. See you in the next one.